Hello, everyone. Welcome and a Happy New Year to all. I am Jet Aguilar from the Astronomical League of the Philippines, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Thank you so much for joining us for our first ALP Astronomy Expert Speaker Series for 2023. I am happy to see a lot of registrants attending, not only from the Philippines, but also from the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Slovakia, Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, among others. 20 years ago, in 1994, humanity was able to witness live for the first time a spectacular astronomical event of a comet colliding with a planet. We are indeed very fortunate to have with us today one of the discoverers of this comet who will revisit with us the spectacular impact of Comet Shoemaker-Levy Levy-9 on the planet Jupiter almost 3 decades ago. Ms. Imelda Jolson and Mr. Edwin Aguirre will be introducing our distinguished speaker later. For those who were not able to register, but would still want to watch this webinar, we are currently live streaming on Facebook at the Facebook page of the Philippine Astronomy Forum. Before we start, kindly allow me to explain some rules for this webinar to help us make this an enjoyable learning experience for everyone. Please listen and do your best to give your undivided attention to our speaker. There will be a short question and answer session at the end of the lecture, where you may type in your questions under the Q&A tab found in your Zoom interface at any point during the presentation. We will do our best to read and answer your questions live after the lecture or via the Q&A tab. We would like to remind everyone that the contents presented in this webinar will remain as the individual property of the lecturer and the photographers in the presentation. We will also be distributing certificates of attendance via email to all registered attendants who will be present with us throughout the webinar tonight or today. So please use the name you have written in your registration forms to help us facilitate this process. Let us all enjoy this talk and have fun learning. Here is the program flow for today's webinar. I would like to turn you over now to Mr. James Kevin T., the President of the Astronomical League of the Philippines, to give his welcome remarks.
Thank you, James, Dr. Jet Aguilar. Good evening to all our good morning to all our viewers in the Philippines, and good evening to our guests in the United States and Europe. My name is James Kevin T., President of the Astronomical League of the Philippines. On behalf of the Astronomical League of the Philippines, I would like to welcome all of you to our Astronomy Experts Speaker Series. This webinar is part of the ALP's International Astronomy Education Outreach Program. Our goal is to bring the known experts and scientists to the Filipino people and to the rest of the world. That is why the webinar is being offered free to the general public. I would like to take this opportunity also to thank ALP members who have been instrumental in putting this program all together, especially Imelda Johnson, Edwin Aguirre, Dr. Jet Aguilar, June Lau, Henry Colty, Andrew Einstein, Peter Benedict Tibanino. So this is actually for this program, this will be our 11th lecture in total, and the first one for 2022. So our speaker for today is David Levy, a Canadian amateur astronomer and science writer, and discoverer of 23 comets and 61 minor planets, and has written a lot of books, especially on astronomy. So we have more distinguished speakers lined up in the coming months. So please stay tuned, and please do not forget to register in advance for these future webinars. Thank you very much. And I would like to turn you over now to the for Imelda Johnson and Edwin Aguirre to introduce our guest speaker for today.
Thanks, James. Welcome, everyone. It's been almost a year for this astronomy expert speaker series, and we're very, very happy of the success we've had this past year. Collisions of celestial bodies are not just a thing of the past. It continues to happen up to now. Planets and moons get hit, and Earth is no exception. One big impact happened to our planet about 65 million years ago in the Yucatan, which caused an extinction event that wiped out the non-avian dinosaurs. Many of us are familiar with the Tunguska event that took place in Siberia in 1908. That impact caused an explosion equivalent to about 185 Hiroshima bombs and flattened about 800 square miles of forest. The well-preserved Barringer crater in Arizona, which is visited by people from all over the world, is a perfect example that Earth does suffer from a direct cosmic hit from time to time. But no human had actually observed a planetary collision until Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. In 1994, just 16 months after Comet SL-9 was discovered, humanity witnessed for the very first time a comet colliding with a planet. Edwin and I could remember clearly all the excitement back then. The impact made headlines in all media outlets. Every telescope around the world, including the Hubble Space Telescope and the camera aboard the Galileo spacecraft, were aimed at Jupiter. No one knew what to expect. That was why we were glued to the television, watching and waiting for the first Hubble images to come in. All the excitement of that event is something that is forever etched in one's memory, especially when the young astronomer Heidi Hammel interrupted the press conference at the Space Telescope Science Institute on July 16, 1994. Heidi was the lead scientist imaging Comet SL-9's impact using the Hubble Space Telescope. She had in her hand a very raw laser printout of what the Hubble Space Telescope captured when the first fragment hit Jupiter. For all those who were not yet around back then, here's a short video clip of that press conference that we'd like to share.
Clump for each nucleus, or whether they're spread out.
Everybody,
But I think that the plume as reported is certainly consistent with these smaller pieces re-aggregating into one clump. That's what effectively hits the top of the atmosphere. One thing I would say is that if we should see these things at all, that it probably indicates we're dealing with larger objects than was concluded by Ashfog and Benz. And I think we may have some up-to-date information from Heidi Hammel.
I'd like to introduce Dr. Heidi Hammel.
Eugene Shoemaker said he would be personally astonished if we saw nothing. Well, or if we didn't see something. Well, he's not going to be astonished. We actually saw some amazing things. We just downloaded the first two orbits. In the first orbit, we were able to see a plume on the edge of the planet. In the second orbit, which I have a raw laser printer output, this is as raw as it gets, we can actually see the impact site itself. And I'll remind you, this is for A, the first one, not the brightest one. So we're going to have a really exciting week. So more details to come. We just got this data down. We haven't had a chance to do anything with it, and I'll be talking with you at 10 o'clock about what we have actually seen in the larger data set.
wavelength, Heidi?
This is a methane filter at 889. Do you have a pencil or pen, something?
Yes.
I don't even have a piece of cardboard to have this mounted on. Okay, we just blew up a section of the planet. This is the southern pole here. You see there's a bright streak. See that bright streak? And around the edge of this streak, there's some other stuff. Stuff. I'll tell you more about this stuff tonight.
I think we may have some more questions here. Wow. Would you like to comment?
Well,
Did that play well, guys?
Yes.
Okay, so tonight we'll hear from one of Comet SL-9's discoverer, David Levy. Edwin, who was David's editor at Sky Telescope for 12 years, will give a formal introduction of David. But before that, we have a little surprise for David. Edwin and I have asked Heidi Hamel to interrupt our program today and give some brief remarks. Heidi is now an interdisciplinary scientist for the James Webb Space Telescope. So tonight is a bit of a reunion of the people who changed history and who gave us a wake-up call of a comet impact is real and that the danger continues even today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Heidi Hamel.
Hello, everyone. And hello, David. It is such a
Hello,
pleasure
Heidi.
to you. You figured it would be fun to break in just like we did the last time. And I wanted to give a little backstory for people who wondered why that happened. And David, you might know this because I think we've talked about it, but the others may not know why we broke into the news conference. And here's the answer. While that news conference was going on, we were down in the basement of the Space Telescope Science Institute. That's where the images were coming in, and we were seeing these amazing images. And at the same time, we had a little TV set up above the terminal, and I could see David and Carolyn and Jean in their press conference, and they looked so serious. And they were, as you heard, they were talking in sort of hypothetical ways, and Jean was making speculations. And we were one floor below them, jumping up and down, drinking champagne, looking at these amazing data. And I said, we have to show Jean and Carolyn and David what we're seeing. And the NASA people were like, oh no, you can't do that. And I said, yes, I can. And I just walked out of the room and walked up the stairs, and I could hear the camera people in front of me saying, she's going up, she's going up. And it was just really, I just wanted to share this with you, David, and with Jean and Carolyn. It just didn't seem right to me that you didn't know the amazing things we were seeing with Hubble. And so that's that's how that happened. And David, I want to thank you because of that event, that kind of put my whole career on a totally new trajectory, which eventually led me to become one of the scientists for the James Webb Space Telescope. There's a little model behind me, which, as you all know, was launched a year ago and is sending back the most amazing data. And, David, I don't think I'd be in the role I'm in if it hadn't been for you and for Carolyn and Jean finding that comet. And boy, it changed my life. So I just want to say thank you.
And thank you, Heidi. This was really a pleasure to see you.
Yeah. And at that, I'm going to turn this back over now to Imelda and to Edwin.
To Edwin, yeah. Thank you so much, Heidi. But I'm pretty sure later you both are going to get questions about this, a ton of questions, I'm sure.
Okay, thank you so much, Melda. And I'm just going to share the screen for my
No, from
introduction.
beginning, play from beginning.
Wait, I need to share first. Share the screen. Share
Oh, there
screen.
you go.
There you go.
Yeah.
Share screen. And yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. It is my great pleasure to introduce to you our guest speaker for today, David Levy. Imelda and I first met David, whom we fondly called Cousin David, back in 1985, when we attended the third American workshop on cometary astronomy, which was held at the Landau Planetarium of the University of Arizona in Tucson. One evening, David invited the workshop attendees to his home in Tucson. And the one thing we remembered during our visit was that every corner of David's home was filled with a telescope. Some of them were large, others were small. That night, we all went to his roll-off roof observatory and we observed Comet Giacobini-Zinner through his 16-inch Newtonian reflector. Everyone had a great time. Now, David Levy is one of the most prolific comet discoverers in history. He is credited with finding 23 comets, as well as 61 minor planets. As far as we know, he is the first person to have discovered comets visually using a telescope, photographically using film, and electronically using CCDs. Of course, the greatest and most memorable discovery of all time by David was Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which he co-discovered with the late Jean and Carolyn Shoemaker. Almost 30 years ago, on March 23, 1993, using an 18-inch Schmidt telescope at Palomar Observatory near San Diego, California. Fragments of Comet SL-9 crashed into Jupiter during the summer of 1994, producing some of the largest and most powerful impacts ever observed in our solar system. Now, in addition to his comet discoveries, David is also an accomplished science writer, editor, columnist, and book author, having published 37 books, mostly about astronomy. Now, David holds bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in English literature. He has been awarded numerous honors, including accolades from the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada, the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, and the Smithsonian Astrophysical Observatory, as well as an Emmy Award for a TV documentary. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. David Levy.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me and I hope you can see me. I can see me.
Actually, we can't see David yet. Oh, there you go.
Great.
You hear me now, okay? Great, okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak tonight, for inviting me to give you a retrospective on the discovery and impacts of Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9. I think I would like to begin by going back to kind of the beginning. I first became interested in astronomy by the sighting of a single meteor going from, where it was going from? It was going from, from the constellation of Draco all the way down towards Vega on the 4th of July, 1956. I was with a group of other children at Twin Lake Camp in Vermont in the United States. And I saw the meteor, and right away I looked toward the others. I said, did any of you see that shooting star? And they all said no, that they didn't. And these were children, and you'd expect they'd start to tease me. But this particular camp was rigorous about making sure that the children respected each other. And so I had no problems with teasing. Anyway, then the idea went into my little 8-year-old David brain. Did that meteor kind of send me a kind of a message? Did it send me something that I might want to remember from the future? So I filed it away and kind of kept it filed for about 3 years until 1961, a bicycle of a book called Our Sun and the Worlds Around It was given to me by a cousin. And I read that, and I read it again, I read it again, and I read it again. I still have the book. I'm still reading it for the hundredth, thousandth time. And I remember after reading that book, deciding that that's all I wanted to do. I remember one night at dinner, my father saying, David, you've talked about astronomy all last week. I'm sure you will talk about astronomy all next week, but this week, talk about something else. Don't make astronomy the most important part of your life. And I said to myself, you're right, I won't. I will make astronomy not the most important part of my life. I will make it the only part of my life. And that has been that way essentially since the summer of 1960 to today. After what I have to call my practice marriage broke up in 1978, I made arrangements to relocate to Arizona, where I'm living right now. And in a few minutes, I will tell you that I'm not at home right now. I'm at the Grasslands Observatory, and there are 2 colleagues of mine who are here with me right now. And one of them has put a can of boiling oil on the ceiling. And whenever I make a mistake, they are ordered to pour the boiling oil on me. So if you see me disappear under a can of boiling oil, you'll know what it was. Anyway, the person who put that up has been a dear friend for many years, and his name is Tim Hunter, very prominent observer. I'd like to introduce you to him.
Good evening. Greetings from Arizona.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And there's the other person, when he comes back, I will introduce you. But he's out doing what he should be doing, observing, and what I will be doing after this presentation is concluded. My first lecture out of well over 2,000 that I've given in my lifetime was given in the spring of 1960. And it was given elementary school I was going to at the time, Roslyn School in Montreal. It's the same school that the famous songwriter Leonard Cohen went to. In fact, Leonard Cohen went to Roslyn. He went to Westmount High School. He went to McGill. And his family were active members in our synagogue, the Shar HaShemayim Synagogue. I followed him in all these things by about 10 years. And it's one of my big regrets. But anyway, one day I was walking towards Westmount High School to do my French oral examination. And I knew that they would be asking me, what do you want to do as a career? And I was really totally taken with astronomy at that time, but I really didn't have an actual goal in it as a career. And I thought, well, what are you going to say, David? And I thought, I'm going to say, I'm going to discover a comet. So that's how it started. Right, just like that, walking down to Westmount High School. I got to the room, big boardroom with the professor at one end, me at the other. He asked a lot of questions. And finally he said, as I expected, what do you want to do as a career? And I was so proud. I sat up straight in my chair and I looked at them, big smile on my face, and I said, Monsieur Hutchison, je veux découvrir une comète. Mr. Hutchison, I would like to discover a comet. The look on Mr. Hutchison's face was absolutely beyond expression. He looked at me and he said, how the hell do you expect to make any money doing something in a career like that? And after he asked that question, everyone in the room just started laughing, including him, including me. And finally he said, okay, David, I'm going to give you credit for that answer, if only because it's the most unusual answer I've ever received in my life. But you better find a comet for me within 20 years or else I'm going to come back and I'm going to lower your mark. So I had to do that. On the 17th of December, 1965, I discovered a comet. And I did make Mr. Hutchison's goal. 19 years later, after over 900 hours of comet searching, I discovered my first comet, Comet Levy-Rudenko. Things started going a little faster after that. I found my second one, 1987, and much faster after that, my third also in 1987, my fourth in 88. And something interesting happened with that. Two people were observing that comet right after it was discovered, Gene and Carolyn Shoemaker. A few months after that, I got to meet the two of them at a conference on comets and asteroids in Tucson. And Gene was standing there, this was at the coffee break, and he was standing there and he pointed towards me with a long pointed finger. There's the finger. And, you know, when someone points a finger like that, you really know that he wants to see you. But I didn't believe it. And I thought he must be looking at some very famous astronomer behind me. I turned around, there was no one behind me. And Gene said, David, you're the man I want to meet. So I went up and I met him. And by the time I got to him, we were already good friends. I'm going to interrupt a little bit right now because I have a second very close colleague who is here, who has been he's been observing for many, many years here in Arizona. And then recently we've started to observe together. Anyway, his name is James McGahey, and I would like to introduce him to you briefly.
Hello?
Hello.
Say James. Say your name.
Oh, James McGahey, sorry.
This is James.
Hello,
And
James.
we observe quite a bit together now. Thanks, James. Anyway, the way he started was that Gene said, there's someone I'd like you to meet, David. And he brought me to a quiet room away from the others where Carolyn was sitting with some friends. And he said, Carolyn, there's someone I'd like you to meet, David. And of course, right away, I became friends with Carolyn. The friendship with Carolyn lasted until about a year, well, I'd say about a year and a half ago, when in August of 2021, Carolyn passed away at the age of 91 or 92. And I really do miss her. Missing a lot of people now as life goes on. Anyway, a few months later, Carolyn, Jean, and I were looking at, we're going up to observe together on Mount Bigelow, north of Tucson. And on the way back from that observing session, I looked at Carolyn and Jean. I said, there's something I need to ask you. And Jean said, well, the best way to do it, David, is just ask. The worst I can say is no. And Carolyn said, we could throw something at him too. Oh yeah, I could do that. But why don't you just ask? And I said, Carolyn, Jean, I'd like to observe with you once or twice. And Jean looked at Carolyn and he went, oh, I think we can arrange that. And that summer I started to observe with them. It was a wonderful time. And that turned into a second session at the end of that year. And in 1989, we had quite a number of sessions. In 1990, even more sessions. I was by then a regular with them. We found our first comet in 1990, and our second comet, which was most interesting, Comet Shoemaker-Levy 2. That one was originally reported as Marsden, who was director of the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams at the time. He said, Carolyn, could you check that comet because its orbit, that planet, that minor planet, because its orbit looks very much more like a comet than like an asteroid. And she said, well, I'm checking it. It looks still asteroidal. Anyway, I was observing about a month later on the 61-inch and at Mount Bigelow. And we decided to take a picture of the asteroid that had just been discovered to see if there was any the position, and went downstairs. The picture was reading out a lot of stars in the field and then a great big comet. And we reported that. It was announced the next day as Comet Shoemaker-Levy 2. We found a whole bunch of other comets in 92. We found 7 comets that year, and I found one visual one. That was 1991. And the 92 was kind of a lot quieter. And 93, we had a lot of clouds and a lot of rain. Almost no clouds, almost no sky at all. Until the night of March 23rd. We had set it up and we took our first set of pictures through the 18-inch telescope. Gene, of course, was downstairs, immediately developed them. And after he developed them, he opened the door and yelled out, "Stop observing, come downstairs at once," which is what we did. He showed us the films that had just been developed. They were totally ruined. It seemed that somebody, we know not who, we actually know who, but I shouldn't say that right here. Somebody, we know who, actually opened our box of films one night, looked into it and said, "Oh my goodness, these are unexposed films. Maybe I should close this box and not tell anybody about it." So we were pretty upset. And then I said, actually, all the films are just laying in the stack. Why don't you take some of the films from near the bottom of the stack? Maybe they might be partially good. And it turns out I was right, they were. The edges were bad, but the middles, the centers were still usable. So that night we started using those. The second night it started to cloud over again. We did take a picture using of of Jupiter. And then the sky really got cloudy and we had to stop. And we went outside and looked out at the darkening, at the cloudy sky. And I said, you know, there's a break in the clouds over there, not far from where we were shooting. We could probably still continue. And Gene laughed and he said, David, every time you want to take a picture, it's expensive. It costs us $8 to snap a film into the film holder every time we take a picture. We cannot just take pictures on a whim, just like you want to do. And I said, Gene, $8, that's not so bad. And Gene said, that's $8 American dollars, not that lousy fake Canadian stuff you guys use. And so we all had a good laugh over that. But then Carolyn said, you know, Gene and David, sky is kind of clearing over there. And the famous line, Gene and Carolyn looked at each other and Gene said, let's do it. And they went inside, we loaded these bad films into the camera again so we could get something. And we put the camera onto the field. We took the image, which was the second image, and I could see Jupiter, the glow from Jupiter in the guide scope. It was so easy, making it very difficult to spot the guide star, but I managed to take the two initial exposures of the field near Jupiter. The next day, Carolyn is scanning, and by now it's cloudy and raining and snowing and very bad weather. And Carolyn is scanning very carefully, and suddenly she looks up and she says, I don't know what I've got, but it looks like a squashed comet. I was a little bit surprised. I thought she was joking. And I called Gene out and he came out. He was in the dark room. And he wanted to take a look. And Carolyn came towards me and I said, you are kidding, aren't you? And she said, she shook her head. She said, no, I'm quite serious. So I needed to see this. Gene looked at me with a look on his face such as one I have never seen before in my life. It was an amazing thing. We called another colleague of mine, Jim Scotty, who was working at Kitt Peak, and he still is, at the Space Watch telescope. And I told him we thought we had something, and could you please take a look for it for us? And he said, well, I'm pretty busy, but I'll do what I can. About an hour and a half later, I called him back. He picked up the phone. He said, uh-huh. I said, is that you, Jim? He says, uh-huh. I said, Jim, Jim, are you okay? And Jim said, the sound you've just heard is me trying to pick my jaw off the floor. I said, do we have a comet? My God, you guys ever have a comet? And he showed us, reported that sent his picture over to Brian Marsden at the Central Bureau for Astronomical Telegrams. It was announced the next day as Comet Shoemaker-Levy. And therein the story ended, except it was so unusual that it made it to page 38 of the New York Times. And the story was accurate, except that they had me married to Carolyn Shoemaker, which was really something Carolyn and I had a good joke over for a long time. This was after I had met Wendy, but before we got very serious and before our marriage in 1990. Anyway, we really enjoyed we really did enjoy the build up to what was coming, talking a lot about Comet Shoemaker-Levy until May 22nd of the same year, 1993. I was reading my email. Carolyn was scanning That would be the discovery day of another Shoemaker-Levy comet that day. And Gene was preparing films for the night's observing. I get this email from the Central Bureau, and it said in a very simple way that Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, which is now what he'd renamed it because it was now known to be a periodic comet, he said it got to 0.5 radii of the center of Jupiter, which is almost touching the planet, close enough that the comet broke apart by Jupiter's gravity. In 1994, the comet will get even closer to Jupiter to get 0.3 radii from the center of Jupiter, which means that there's going to be a collision. In case anyone didn't realize that, I recognized it. Brian's interesting way of informing the world that there's going to be a major collision. He had a second circular out at the same time that said, as most of you have probably gathered from the last circular, Comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 will collide with Jupiter on the 16th of July to the 21st of July, 1994. The comet was extremely active. The pieces of the comet by now had spread apart quite a bit. I remember at the discovery, they were all within about a degree of sky away from each other, close enough that when I got home from that observing, I immediately set up my 16-inch telescope, pointed to Jupiter, moved a little to the north, and I was able to see Comet SL-9 just a week after discovery. I'm not the only one, so maybe there are people in the Philippines Astronomical Society who have seen SL-9, and I know there were some people at the following year's Lunar Star Party who were able to get a view of it. We've already heard from Heidi Hamill about what happened on the 16th of July. It was an unforgettable night. I remember talking with Gene a few months before. He asked me where I was going to be on the first night of impacts. And I said, I think I'm going to be in California, where the sky will be clear in July, and I'll be able to use a big telescope to see if I can see any impacts. Where are you going to be? Gene said, I'm going to be in Washington. And where are you going to be? And I said, I just told you I'm going to be in California. And he said, I'm going to be in Washington. Where are you going to be? And I said, I think I'm going to be in Washington with the two of you. And Gene and Carolyn just laughed and they said, I'm so glad we heard you said that and we heard you say that, because this means that we're all going to be together, just in case it's a bust. We don't see anything. We want to, all three of us, find a rock we can hide behind. We didn't have to hide behind a rock. It turned out to be a very important moment in the history of science. And a couple of recent things that I want to tell you about. In early October, or mid-October, this was just about 2 or 3 weeks after my wife Wendy passed away from breast cancer, and that's something that I have been living through ever since. Wasn't prepared for it, and it's very difficult for me. But I'm feeling a lot better right now with this lecture and being at this observatory tonight. And Tim, thank you for inviting me to come here. James, thank you.
Come and show them. This is Shoemaker-Levy 4.
Oh, really?
Yes. We just took a picture.
Oh, they just took a picture. I'm going to interrupt.
Wow.
We just took a picture of Shoemaker-Levy 4. Can you see it?
Move it off to the side.
Can you guys see it? I'll see it.
It's a bit blurred.
Yeah, it's a little blurry.
Maybe try focusing a little bit on the
Let's see,
camera.
wait a second.
Oh, it's a lot brighter than I thought it was. Thank you.
How about here, try this one, show this to him.
Okay, how's that? This is a picture taken seconds ago.
Well, we can see the hint of the comet, but still blurred from the
David,
Great.
the focus is focus problem is with your cell phone. It's not focused on the screen.
Okay, well, you got to see the
So
fuzzy.
maybe you can bring your phone closer.
Okay, let me try that again.
This is exciting.
Is that better?
Pan down a little, pan down a little.
Bring it down. Yeah,
Yeah,
we can see a smudge in the.
That's it. That's the comet. A little tail and everything.
It doesn't really have a tail. It has sort of a parabolic coma.
Parabolic
And
coma.
the nucleus is very, very stellar.
Yeah, very
what's
stellar.
the magnitude? What magnitude is that?
It's about 16th.
Wow.
So that's SL4, Comet
That's
SL4.
Shoemaker-Levy 4, discovered in 1991, 2 years before SL-9. Well, on that basis, I should start to wind things up. And I'm going to wind things up with some. My professional education has not been in astronomy. As a matter of fact, I need to, and here's where the boiling oil is on top of me. I have to admit that I have never in my life taken a course in astronomy. I come to you tonight ignorant of all astronomy. So I hope you don't mind that you're letting me give this lecture tonight. But what I did get interested in was in the night sky as expressed in English poetry. And that became my professional field. And I remember when I was doing my master's work at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, my thesis advisor, Norman Mackenzie, introduced me to an early poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins. If any of you who have studied English poetry have read Hopkins, you will know how complex a poet he is and how difficult it is to follow his rhyme scheme. It's almost impossible. In fact, most people will say it's not even worth following, except for a poem that he wrote as he was learning, being educated at Balliol College at Oxford. And he wrote the following poem. I am like a slip of comet, scarce worth discussing. Two stars. But when she sights the sun, she grows and sizes and spins her skirts out, while her central star shakes its cocooning mists. And so she comes to fields of light. Millions of traveling rays pierce her. She hangs upon the flame-cased sun and sucks the light as full as Gideon's fleece. But then her tether calls her. She falls off. And as she dwindles, sheds her smock of gold amidst the sistering planets, and then goes out into the cavernous dark. So I go out, my little suite is done. I have drawn heat from this contagious sun. To not ungentle death, now forth I run. That meant so much to me. I based my entire MA thesis on it. I ended up doing my doctorate on the night sky and the works of Shakespeare. And there's a book I wrote published by Springer called The Starlight Night that contains both my doctoral dissertation and my master's thesis. It may be in a library. I don't recommend any of you buy it because it's too expensive, but if you would like to buy a book from me, that's a little bit shorter than my doctoral thesis. And it's a book about a magic beagle who takes a group of children on a romp through the night sky and shows the children all the things there are to see in the sky. You can get it on Amazon. What you have to do is you log into Amazon, then you go to books, and then you type in Clipper, Cosmos, and it should come up. Anyway, I'm going to end tonight with another poem. When before I do this poem, I really have to say how saddened I am. I really was not ready. Wendy died from breast cancer on September the 23rd. I was not ready for it. And she just went within about 3 or 4 weeks. It was just so difficult for me. But one of the things that she loved to do was to quote a particular poem with me. It's by Ralph Hodgson, and it's called The Song of Honor. Now, I could quote the entire poem for you, but that would mean that this lecture would go on for about 3 days. So I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to quote the final stanza, which is one that Wendy and I love to quote together. And as I quote it, you can almost imagine Wendy here right now quoting it with me. I stood and stared. The sky was lit. The sky was stars all over it. I stood, I knew not why, without a wish, without a will. I stood upon that silent hill and stared into the sky until my eyes were blind with stars, and still I stared into the sky. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much. It was really a very heartwarming and personal account of your journey into comet discoveries and also with the SL-9 event. I really felt it's different from our usual talks that we get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody suggested that since we did not show any videos or pictures, can we just replay what, is that okay, Edwin? We replay the slide that you presented before we look at the Q&A?
Sure.
Sure. Let me just share the screen. Okay, bear with me.
That's me.
Yeah. So what's the name of your telescope there?
That is Cupid. That is a telescope Wendy bought for me as a wedding present.
Okay.
It's a Questar.
Yeah.
Cassin Dovi.
I don't know the Questar is still making telescopes.
I remember when we visited you in
This
80.
is Obadiah.
The Schmidt camera.
That is a Schmidt camera.
Yeah.
With a refractor on top of it.
And 12 inch.
That I still have. It's a 12-inch, the
Mead.
12-inch there. And this is Carolyn and G. Shoemaker at the 18-inch. You can see the 18-inch if you go to Palomar. It's in the visitor center. And that is the discovery, one of the confirmation images of SL-9.
David, is this the squash comet that was mentioned by?
That's it, yeah.
Yeah, that's what, yeah.
Was this taken by Jim Scotty at Spacewatch?
That was taken by Jim Scotty at Spacewatch. You got that right.
This was taken by Heidi?
No, Hal Weaver. Hal Weaver was in charge.
Oh, Hal Weaver.
We were just at Hal's retirement party last week, David. It was really fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
David, we have to confess something. We tried.
Good for you, yeah.
We tried to invite Jim Scotty for this reunion, but he apparently didn't get the message. So
Well, we sent it today.
yeah, it was kind of late, so we apologize for that.
Well, I'm glad you got Heidi.
So these were
Nope.
from our team.
Was
That's
this,
from your team.
yeah, was this the largest fragment? Fragment G?
Yes,
He
the
was
one on the left. Yeah, that was the largest.
Heidi,
the-
you might want to explain how big it is compared to the Earth.
Sure.
The
So
best way I can explain it, the best way I can explain it is that Clark Chapman, planetary astronomer, said that it was the darkest, most profound spot ever seen on the planet Jupiter since its discovery. That spot is as large as the Earth.
yeah, the Earth it would fit inside that arc. There's off to the
It would
sort of
fit
up-
inside.
the Earth would fit inside that. So if this had happened on Earth in 1994 instead of on Jupiter, it's what we would call a biosphere changing event. Sort of like what happened
Absolutely.
with dinosaurs 65 million years ago.
Absolutely.
It was great that we were watching it over happening on Jupiter. In that sequence on the side there, on the bottom image, if you look very closely, you see like a little white bump off the edge of Jupiter.
Yep.
That is in fact the plume of material that was being ejected after the giant impact. And it hit on the far side of Jupiter. We couldn't actually see the impacts themselves with the Hubble Space Telescope, but that plume was so big, it was 3,000 miles high above the cloud tops, and it stuck out beyond the limb of Jupiter. And that's why you can see that little tiny dot there. Tiny. It's not tiny, but it looks tiny in that picture because Jupiter's so big. And then the next picture up, the second from the bottom, was an hour and a half later when that impact site had rotated into view. And that is what the black stuff is where that super giant plume had collapsed onto the cloud tops. And that's what made the black spots. And then as the week went on, that the stuff got smeared around by the atmospheric winds of Jupiter. And that's why the ones on the top look sort of swirly and distorted.
Yeah. To quote you, Heidi, there's a lot of stuff.
A lot of stuff. Well, you got to remember that when I went up there to talk to David and Jean and Carolyn, we didn't have any idea what it was. I mean, it was just black spots on Jupiter. It looked white in the methane band because that is a special wavelength where even the little bit of methane in Jupiter's atmosphere absorbs light. And so what we were seeing there was this high altitude stuff. Remember, this black stuff was the plumes collapsing down on the top of the atmosphere. And so the sunlight was scattering back from the plume stuff before it could be absorbed by the methane. So when the methane filters, all the black stuff turned white. So yeah, but boy, yeah, we had no idea. I had no idea. But Gene, he had all sorts of great ideas, and it took us a while I think it took us a couple of weeks to really sort it out. Because some of those earlier pictures you showed, there were infrared images, and the timeline of the infrared flares didn't match. Yeah, those they took a long time. They were like 20 minutes, but the impacts were just like meteors on Earth, which are cosmic impacts. They were super short. And so it took us a long time to figure out how these things all fit together. Those were really the hot plumes, and they were hot for a long time. By hot, I mean 40,000 degrees, super heated by the fantastic impacts. So, yeah.
How deep did the fragments go inside the atmosphere of Jupiter?
Pretty shallow. They kind of broke up shortly after impact, so they didn't go that deep into the planet.
Okay.
Well, I have to.
This
share
was
with you
one of the
something.
surprises.
Yeah, I have to share with you something. Back then, we couldn't go to a dark sky site because I just had surgery. And we looked at it through a 3-inch refractor in Pasadena, at a backyard in Pasadena. And I have to tell you, the view of it was impressive, even on a 3-inch refractor.
It was so prominent on a 3-inch telescope at medium power. Yeah.
But
David, when did you first get to see the impact sites with your own eyes? When did that happen?
The first time was, I think, around the 21st of July. I was at the Naval Observatory, and I was standing in line, a very long line. And as I would stand in line, they would keep on pushing me closer to the front of the line. And I didn't really want to do that, but I kept on being pushed and pushed and pushed, and finally got to the front of the line. I got to look at through the finder of that telescope, and I could see the impact spots with the finder. Then I looked through the main telescope, and it was the fragment L impact that had just come on. And a lot of the other impacts were there as well, but the L was the largest at the time. I guess G was on the other side of the point. But I did enjoy very much that night. A couple of days earlier, I got to meet the owner of that telescope, Vice President Al Gore. And I was at the White House, and I said to myself, very much to myself, I said, you may be Vice President of the United States, but I'm going to get to see the impact spots before you do. Anyway, then Al Gore said, last night was clear, and you know I live on the grounds of the Naval Observatory. And I said to myself, don't say it. And he said, I walked over, someone you know let me in. And I said, could I take a look at Jupiter? And I saw some of the impact spots, and they were impressive. And I said, okay. I said to myself, okay. So in addition to being vice president, you also saw the spots before I did.
Well, David, another story I have that we haven't told you this. We shared it with Heidi a little bit
last night,
but during that time I had to have an arthroscopic knee surgery, and I was trying to delay it because I said I have to watch the impact. You know, I need to see the Hubble images. But the doctor says, no, you're scheduled. So they pushed through with the surgery. And when I woke up later that evening, I was still groggy. Edwin came to my bedside and said, holding a Polaroid. And he said, look at this. And I said, whoa, is that the impact? He says, no, that's the bone spurs in your knee.
Inside.
So even though I was having surgery, my mind was still on SL-9.
Yeah.
But, you know.
Oh, that's your cat.
Yeah.
So, Heidi, you mentioned last night that before the impact, there were two camps of scientific thinking regarding the collision with Jupiter. One said nothing will happen, and then the other side said something will be visible. Now, which side were you? If for the benefit of our viewers.
I shouldn't tell David this, but I was actually in the Paul Weitzman camp of the big fizzle. My thinking was that nothing was going to happen because Jupiter's really big, and these comets, it's a good sized comet, right? It was, what was it, David? Like 1.5 miles across, 2 miles, something like that.
Yeah.
But Jupiter's huge. And so I thought this comet would just like disappear without a trace, right? The fragments, especially the small ones. And I thought if we'd saw anything at all, and I was actually interviewed by the BBC the night before, saying, what do you think you're going to see, Dr. Hamill? And I said, well, maybe little tiny puffs of white clouds where the impacts were. It's on BBC tape. Like, yeah, I was completely wrong. Totally, utterly wrong. David, what did you think? What was your guess?
I remember reading that article in Science. I think it was in Science. 2 days before the impacts. Beware, the great fizzle is coming. And I wrote to the author of the article and I said, do you really mean that? Because you may be right. And he wrote me back, and Paul Weissman wrote me back and he said, sadly, I may be very wrong, because if Jupiter is as big as it is, the impacts might take place high in the atmosphere, in which case we may see a but he was very glad to be wrong on that.
I think we were all
And no
glad
one
to be
blames
wrong.
Yeah, nobody blames that.
Well, Gene was pretty convinced we would see something, I think. I mean, he had some models, right, David, of what would happen of these big explosions. So he was right.
Well, yeah, I mean, when Heidi came out onto that press conference, she had a large bottle of champagne that she gave to Gene. Of course, Gene shared it with the rest of us. And that was a very happy time. And I know that Gene and Carolyn right now are both best known for their roles in the discovery. Anyway, it's so good to see you again, Heidi.
You too, David. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's
David and Heidi, isn't it because of the SL-9 impact? He went to Congress and he was able to convince Congress about planetary defense.
actually the approval from Congress came from that committee that Gene testified in front of, came before the impacts. And that was because they trusted Gene so much. Congress then was very different from what it is today. Very, very different. But they trusted Gene and they recommended that more money be spent. After the impacts, it was no problem for Congress to approve that. Good question.
So that is how Space Watch was born.
Space Watch actually was well underway by that time. I think Space Watch dates back to the late 1980s because Jim Scotty was working there with it for the entire length of the time.
But after Shoemaker-Levy 9, like David said, there was a lot more funding that was being put into NASA specifically to look for more of these potential impactors. Congress actually wrote a law directing NASA to find as many of the largest impactors, the ones that are potentially able to destroy a city, if you will, and anything larger, of course. And NASA set up a planetary defense office. And there are now many surveys going on right now, studying the sky at all times, looking for objects that could potentially hit. And in fact, quite a few have been found prior to hitting the Earth and predicted to hit the Earth and then have hit the Earth. And so the whole process has really, it's working, let me put it that way. We are finding things before they hit. And that fortunately, they've all been very small things, right? Things that are not going to be destroying cities. But there was an interesting story, and David, if you can help me remember the year, there was a prediction of a close pass of an asteroid. And so a lot of people were looking for this. I think it was 2013. And at the time, they were all looking over here, like to see this one that was predicted to pass. And the very same day, another asteroid came in from a completely different direction and exploded in the skies over Chelyabinsk, Russia. And this was a massive airburst. There was like a big streak in the sky, and there was a shock wave, and it blew out windows all over the city. 1,400 people were injured, mostly by flying glass from the windows that were exploding. And that was one we hadn't seen because it came from a direction that we had not anticipated. And so this is this cosmic impacts is a very real and important topic now. NASA takes it very seriously. And so there, like I said, there's many surveys going on. And there's a new survey, a new telescope being built in Chile right now, which is named the Vera Rubin Observatory.
Yeah.
And it is, it's a fantastic new telescope. It's under construction. It's planning to start operations next year, at the end of next year. And it's going to do what is called the Large Survey of Space and Time. And it's going to survey the entire Southern Hemisphere because it's in Chile. It's in the Southern Hemisphere. And then 3 days later, it will survey the sky again. And 3 days later, it will survey the sky again and build up a movie of the sky for 10 years. And this will be used for all kinds of astrophysical things, all kinds of things that vary in the sky. But one of the topics is looking for more of these potentially hazardous objects, giving us a deeper census. So there's a lot of great stuff happening. And you know, this work that David, that night that he was telling you about, let's use this plate, let's do this thing. I can hear Gene Shoemaker saying that, let's do it. You know, that really made this all real and made it, you know, something that we all take super seriously now. So again, thank you, David.
Yeah, well,
Say it over and over again.
Heidi, I will buy your 2013 date. Whether it is that year or not, I'm going to buy it anyway. But anyway, this is wonderful, wonderful news. But it's also sad in a way because when I started searching for comets in 1965, no interest by professionals, they were interested in comets once they were discovered, but there was no professional interest in searching for comets. So for all these years, the amateurs, the visual observers, had the field to themselves. That is not true anymore. So I applaud the new telescope. I've seen the chip that they're going to put in it. It's about as big as that framed picture behind me. That's just huge. Yeah, you've probably seen it too. And so I applaud that. But I'm also a little wistful because the way I was brought up would be impossible for young people to be brought up that way today.
Well, yes and no. There's always room for the amateur community, and we're now the professionals are working more closely with amateurs because most of the time we're just looking at one place in the sky. Like James Webb Space Telescope, super awesome. It has a super tiny field of view. And so we rely on the amateur community who are always all looking at amazing things. They're always looking at Jupiter. They're always looking for comets. They're always looking for just interesting things happening. They tell us, and then we do follow-up. So we work together, the professional and the amateur community. I'm a huge proponent of working together because our big telescopes are super limited in time, but the amateur community brings all the thousands and hundreds of thousands of people and their telescopes and their minds and their eyes to the sky, and we work together. So I'm not as sad. I mean, that telescope that we were talking about, David, that's in the Southern Hemisphere. We don't really have anything like that in the Northern Hemisphere. There's a big discovery space.
True. That is true. It's different. It's not really good or bad. It's just very different from what it was when I was growing up. And my answer is a very personal one. I agree with you, Heidi. There's a lot of reasons for amateurs to be interested in astronomy now and in the night sky. Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Maybe-
Heidi.
Yeah.
I will
David,
just, I just want to share one thing. I've worked closely with Christopher Go, who is an
Wow.
amateur based there in the Philippines. He does spectacular Jupiter imaging. And we rely on people like Christopher to tell us when there are very unusual things happening in Jupiter's atmosphere. And that will allow us to then do follow-up work with the larger professional telescopes. So, you know, the Philippines are on the map. They're on the map for astronomy. And, you know, I really I have the greatest respect for the amazing work that amateurs can do. In fact, I had a program a couple of years ago where we were going to use the Hubble Space Telescope to look at the planet Uranus. But we wrote this proposal as what we call a target of opportunity. And we wrote in the proposal specifically, we're going to rely on amateur astronomers to study the planet Uranus. And if they see a discrete feature, a cloud feature that is verified by multiple amateurs that we can actually see it as the planet is rotating, if that is fulfilled, we will then use the Hubble Space Telescope to turn to Uranus to follow up on that cloud feature. That proposal relied on the amateur community. It was crucial.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I have a little very short personal story to share with you based on that. Jupiter is my favorite planet, but not for the obvious reason. It's my favorite planet because it's the first thing I looked at through a telescope on September the 1st, 1960. It's the first thing I ever looked at through a telescope.
What did you see? Did you see the Great Red Spot?
Yes, I don't remember the red spot, but I did remember seeing the north and south equatorial belts and at least 3 of the 4 Galilean satellites that night. It was a never to be forgotten night. Really remember that very, very well. Thanks for asking.
Heidi, can I just ask, there's a question here in the web, in the chat box that regarding the pro-am collaboration. Are there resources or websites that amateurs can access or join for pro-am collaboration?
Yeah, there for Jupiter watching, for giant planet watching in general, there is a very strong amateur professional collaboration. There's a site that's called PVOL, P-V-O-L. It's based in Spain. Ricardo Hueso is one of the people that runs this. And that's a place where amateurs can upload observations and information. There are tools there to help map out Jupiter. One of the challenges we have with Jupiter is the winds blow at different speeds at different latitudes. And so there are tools there that help map out the planet. And so that's I would do a Google search on PVOL and Jupiter thing and see what you and dig around and you can find that. It's online.
Thank you, Heidi. Before we proceed with the Q&A, I would just like to read some of the comments here that we have from our attendees regarding David's presentation. So one is from Kay Jebros. He said, "Thank you, David, for some wonderful stories." Well, your stories are really very inspiring, David, and the reunion with Heidi is really very touching. We were really really very touching for all of us. And then there's this comment from Dave Mitski. Dave Mitski. Hello, David. Do you remember observing at Lake Titicaca in Bolivia in 2004? That was some trip for more than one reason, from Dave Mitski. And then from Joshua Roth. Thank you, David. It's Joshua Roth who met you in the dark at Palomar when I was a grad student. I observed the spots in Jupiter from SL-9 at the Science Center in Edmonton. Now I live near Edwin and Imelda in Massachusetts. Clear skies. And then again from Joshua Roth, it was visible in a 3-inch telescope regarding the impact. From David Moore, I watched the collisions from Ireland in a 9-inch telescope, along with 1,000 other people gathered at an event in Ireland. So happy memories. What size was the largest fragment and how accurately do we know this? Question from David Moore. Maybe we can answer that now. So what was the largest fragment and how accurately do we know this?
The largest one was obviously the G fragment, and it was probably, my guess would be about 2 or 3 kilometers across, but other scientists say that it was less than 1 kilometer across. It almost doesn't matter because small is beautiful. And when these, whatever their size is, we do know the velocity at which they came in, at which they came into Jupiter. They were hitting Jupiter at the velocity of 60 kilometers per second. And those of you will be able to fly across the United States in about a minute.
Thank you. There's another interesting comment from Joshua Roth. I recall sitting through 2 hours of sordid local news on Saskatchewan TV to get a 2-second glimpse of the Hubble image. And a related question regarding amateurs, David, because this is one of the first questions that was asked. Given a lot of computer or robotic telescope surveys of the sky, like Pan-STARRS or CTF, what would you think about the chances of an amateur astronomer discovering a comet now? And for those who would like to discover a comet, what type of instrument would be the minimum you would recommend, and what would be the best instrument? So what are the chances?
That is a very good question, and the chances an amateur astronomer is going to discover visually a comet now are almost nil, because of what we've been trying to tell you, that these professional surveys have essentially co-opted the entire sky for the discovery of comets, novae, and supernovae, and asteroids. I still look for comets. I wouldn't recommend anyone start with that right now if they haven't done it, but I've done this all my life, and that's what I do. So whether I find another comet or not, I start as I did tonight before I joined your meeting. I start in the west, wide field in my telescope, about 3 degrees, and I just look and move from one field to the next until I find something interesting. I don't think I'm ever going to find a comet anymore, but I mean, some amateurs still do that. I think the last amateur astronomer to discover a comet visually was either Don Muckles, who has since passed away, sadly, or Kaoru Ikea, who is still doing it, the discoverer of the Great Comet of 1965, and he discovered his most recent comet in 2003. My most recent one was in 2006, October 2nd, 2006. Ooh. I think my phone connection is, no, it's still good.
Yeah, it's good. You're okay again.
I'm still here, I think.
Yeah, you're here. There's another follow-up question on that, David. While Comet Shoemaker SL-9 is probably the most famous of the comets you discovered, do you have a different favorite one among your discoveries? What is your other favorite? Yeah.
My first comet, of course, because the first one you never forget. You never forget any of them. But the comets were like my children. In fact, I have an album with pictures of all of them. The brightest comet that I ever found was Comet Levy in 1990, in May 1990. And it became a bright comet visible to the unaided eye, even in a city sky. So that might have been my favorite. But these are my children, so they're all my favorite. Not to mention my grandchildren that are real, who live in Albuquerque, Summer and Matthew. Summer is going to be married in September. It'll be my first driving trip in about a year. And so I'm looking forward to that very much. But the people that I'm with now are kind of throwing boiling oil on me, hoping that I'm going to be able to go out and observe with them. Would you guys give me permission to do that?
Yes.
Of course, David, you know, but before you go, I have a question for you and Heidi. During the time of Brian Marston, we get to talk to him a lot at his office, and the surveys were not as much as, you know, what's being done right now. And back then, the question that he always tells Edwin and I that there are still areas up in the sky that are not covered by the surveys. And Heidi, maybe you can explain this further because you know the surveys now. Are there overlaps? Are there still areas in the sky where amateurs can concentrate on?
The answer is yes, they are, but Heidi knows better than I do. You're right.
We don't currently have a full all sky survey going in the north. We have surveys in certain areas. And so areas that we tend to avoid are areas like the galactic plane. And we avoid that because there's so many stars there that for some of the deep sky surveys, you're better off not looking at the galactic plane. And so that's probably an area that if amateurs want to concentrate, they can do that. And as David said, you know, just going out and scanning the skies is a good thing to do. There's so much to see. It's beautiful. I don't think it's impossible, David, that an amateur who's out there might pick up a fast-moving incoming comet before one of our observational ones does in the northern hemisphere. Once Rubin goes on sky in the southern hemisphere, it's going to dominate. But the northern hemisphere, I think there's still some discovery space.
Thank you. This is a great way to end this on. Thank you very much.
David, before you go, David,
Yes.
before you go, can we just give you our certificate of appreciation?
Sure.
So it's this one from the ALP, from the Astronomical League of the Philippines. We would like to present to David Levy this certificate for his invaluable insights, experiences, and expertise with the webinar entitled Impact When a Comet Collided with Jupiter, given this 22nd of January 2023, signed by the President, James Kevin T., and Jose Francisco Aguilar, the Vice President. And we would also like to have a group picture with all the attendees, with all the panelists before we go. So I'll go into a gallery view.
Sorry.
Yeah.
There.
Wait. Sorry.
Okay, good.
Can have a group picture.
Okay. 1, 2, 3.
All set?
One more.
Thank you.
Do one more.
Okay.
Okay.
Melda, Edwin, can you get closer, a little closer? You're cut off.
Closer to the
No,
They're good.
both of you get a little farther, then closer. Yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
1,
you.
2, 3.
Ulit. Melda, closer.
Okay, I'm close.
Okay,
They're good, James.
Okay, good. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
We're
Thank you,
already
David.
close, otherwise we'll
Yeah.
collide.
Well,
Thank you, David. David has to
Thank you very
observe.
much.
Yeah,
Thank
thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
Yeah.
Thank you also, Heidi. Thank you
Thank
so
you for your
much.
time,
Thank
David.
you.
David.
Good to
So,
see you,
Heidi-
David.
Thank you.
By the way, guys, Heidi will be our speaker in March.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Jet will
Looking
announce it.
forward to it. So excited already.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, David. Take
Thank
care.
you. Thank you, David. Thank you.
David, you're excused, but we're gonna continue.
I'm gonna go too. Bye.
Okay,
Thanks,
thanks.
Heidi.
Bye-bye.
Go
Bye-bye.
observe the green comet,
ZTF.
ZTF.
the green comet is not. The green comet is not green, or it's not greenish, but it's not
There was
green. It is
actually a question about that, but I did not read it
I
anymore.
saw it a few days ago. It's pretty hard in binoculars, but it's not a bad thing for a small telescope. Anyway, I'm going to continue trying to.
Good luck with your observing.
Happy
Ryan.
observing. Happy observing. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Happy observing. Okay,
Happy
bye.
observing.
Bye.
I would like to go back to. So thank you so much. Before we end, I would like to thank all our attendees for joining us. We will be sending your certificate of attendance for today's webinar by email to all registrants who were able to join us today. This is the first talk for our 2023 Astronomy Expert Speaker Series. And last year, we had 10 speakers for our webinar series. Our past webinars have all been recorded and could all be viewed at our ALP YouTube channel shown here. We are so grateful to all our webinar speakers who very generously gave their precious time to share their knowledge and expertise to the world amateur astronomical community. We can never thank you enough. And lastly, we would like to announce our upcoming webinar next month, which will be the ALP National Astronomy Week 2023 opening program, with the theme Under One Sky, One World, to be held on January 19, 2023, which is a Sunday, 9:00 a.m. Philippine Standard Time. The opening remarks will be given by no other than the current International Astronomical Union President, Dr. Deborah Emil Green. And the next talk will be on the first talk will be on the entitled "The Fight Against Light Pollution" by the editor of the prestigious Sky and Telescope magazine, J. Kelly BT, to be followed by Ms. Imelda Jozon on the topic "From the Earth to the Stars and Back." And then the last talk will be by our fellow ALP member, Mr. Peter Tubalinal, who will discuss observing the sky with small telescopes, and he will also touch on cell phone astrophotography. We will be posting the registration link for this free webinar at the webpage of the Astronomical League of the Philippines, shown below. So thank you, everyone, and happy Chinese New Year to all. Kung Hei Fat Choi. We will be having our post-webinar meeting after this for all the panelists. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.